Frozen human baby, alone in the forest. Crying for help, what this mother bear did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new to our channel. The howling winter wind swept through the ancient pines, bending their heavy branches until they creaked in protest. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, blanketing the forest floor in white silence. The temperature had plummeted well below freezing as darkness began to settle across the remote wilderness of Blackwater National Forest. Nothing stirred in this desolate landscape. Nothing except for the faint, desperate cry of an infant. The tiny sound barely carried through the dense snowfall, a fragile thread of life in a world of ice and darkness. In a small clearing between towering evergreens lay a bundle wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. The fabric, once pink, now appeared gray against the pristine snow. Within its folds, a baby girl no more than 3 months old shivered violently, her small face turning an alarming shade of blue around her lips and nose. Olivia Bennett had been lost for nearly 5 hours. The small search party that had formed at the ranger station was growing increasingly desperate as night fell and the storm intensified. They had no way of knowing that the infant had been accidentally left behind when her young parents' car broke down. In their panic to find help, disoriented by the sudden blizzard, they had made a terrible mistake, one that might cost their daughter her life. The baby's cries grew weaker with each passing minute. Her tiny fingers and toes had long since gone numb, and her body temperature was dropping dangerously low. Frost formed on her eyelashes as tears froze against her reddened cheeks. She would not survive much longer in these conditions. A shadow moved between the trees. Large and powerful, it emerged slowly into the clearing, careful paws pressing into the deep snow. A mother bear, normally deep in winter hibernation, had been awakened by some primal instinct, or perhaps by the strange, high-pitched sound that didn't belong in her forest. She approached cautiously, her massive head swinging from side to side, nostrils flaring as she caught an unfamiliar scent. The bear, a female grizzly with rich brown fur, now dusted with snowflakes, circled the small bundle. Her breath came out in great clouds of vapor as she sniffed the air. She was thin from the beginning of hibernation, her body meant to be conserving energy for the long winter ahead. Yet something had drawn her from her den, some call she couldn't ignore. The baby's cries had weakened to small whimpers. Her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one more labored than the last. The mother bear moved closer, enormous against the tiny human child. She lowered her head and sniffed at the bundle, her hot breath momentarily warming the baby's face. The infant's eyes fluttered open briefly, deep blue meeting the dark brown of the bear's gaze. What happened next would defy everything known about wild animal behavior. The mother bear gently nudged the bundle with her nose, then carefully, with a tenderness that seemed impossible from such powerful jaws, she took the edge of the blanket between her teeth. With incredible delicacy, she adjusted the covering around the baby, tucking it closer to protect from the biting wind. Then, in a move that would later leave hardened rescue workers in tears, the mother bear lay down beside the infant, curling her massive body around the tiny human. She positioned herself to block the wind, her thick fur creating a barrier against the deadly cold. The bear placed one heavy paw carefully over the bundle, pulling it closer to her chest where her body heat was strongest. The baby stopped crying. Night fell completely over the forest, and the snowstorm raged on. But within the protective circle of the mother bear's embrace, little Olivia Bennett began to warm. Her breathing steadied, her tiny fingers regained their pink hue, and for the first time in hours, she slept. Safe against all odds, guarded by the unlikeliest of saviors. Miles away, at the Blackwater Ranger Station, Mason Harper stared grimly at the weather radar. The veteran park ranger had been coordinating search and rescue for 15 years, but he'd never faced conditions this severe with an infant's life at stake. The radio crackled with updates from his team, their voices tight with worry as they reported zero visibility and temperatures still dropping. "We've got to keep moving," Mason said into his radio, his breath fogging in the station's dimly lit office. "That baby won't last more than an hour in these conditions." Beside him, Dr. Elena Castillo nodded silently. The pediatrician from the nearby town had volunteered immediately when the call came in. Her medical bag sat ready by the door, though the grim reality was that each passing minute made it less likely she would need it. "The parents are in shock," said Deputy Forester Liam Coleman, stomping snow from his boots as he entered the station. "Father keeps saying they only turned away for a moment when their car stalled. Mother isn't speaking at all." Mason's weathered face hardened. He'd seen tragedy before in these woods, but losing a child like this, it was unthinkable. He pulled on his heavy gloves and reached for his emergency pack. "I'm heading back out," he announced. "Elena, stay with the parents. Liam, gather whoever's still able to move. We're going to grid search the area around their car one more time." Back in the forest clearing, the mother bear remained vigilant through the darkest hours of night. Twice she rose, circling the perimeter as if sensing potential threats, before returning to curl around the baby once more. When small predators, drawn by the strange scent, approached from the forest edge, she let out a warning growl that sent them scurrying back into darkness. The baby stirred occasionally, making small sounds in her sleep. Each time, the bear would lower her massive head, gently nudging the bundle and sniffing the child's face before settling back down, seemingly satisfied that the tiny human remained alive. By midnight, the storm began to ease. The howling wind gradually subsided to a whisper, and the heavy snowfall lightened to occasional flakes drifting down through the trees. The forest stood silent under a thick blanket of white, moonlight occasionally breaking through the clouds to cast blue shadows across the snow. In this ethereal light, something extraordinary continued to unfold. A mother bear, a creature feared for its ferocity and strength, using that same power to shelter a fragile human child through the deadly night. The bear's own cubs had been lost the previous spring to a male grizzly, a common but heartbreaking reality of nature. Perhaps some memory of that loss stirred in her, some maternal instinct that transcended species. Or perhaps it was something even more profound, a recognition of vulnerability that called for protection rather than predation. Whatever the reason, as the temperature reached its lowest point in the small hours of morning, the bear pulled the baby closer, her body heat the only thing standing between the tiny human and certain death. She rested her head on her paws, dark eyes alert despite her own need for hibernation, instinctively understanding that her vigilance was necessary for the child's survival. In the distance, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as Mason's search team pushed deeper into the forest. They moved with renewed urgency, knowing that with each passing hour, hope dimmed. Yet they refused to give up, their determination driving them forward through waist-deep snow and treacherous terrain. The car was abandoned just north of Bear Creek Trail, Mason said, consulting his topographical map with a flashlight. If they were trying to reach the Eastern Ranger Station, they might have cut through this clearing. The searchers nodded grimly, adjusting their headlamps and spreading out in a line. None of them voiced the fear that gripped them all, that they might be searching not for a living child, but for a body to return to the devastated parents. Dawn approached with agonizing slowness. The first faint light of morning revealed a transformed landscape, pristine, beautiful, and deadly. The storm had passed, leaving behind 3 feet of fresh snow and temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Mason's team had been searching through the night without success, their hopes dimming with each passing hour. "We need to consider calling in air support once there's enough light," Liam suggested, his voice hoarse from calling the baby's name throughout the night. "Helicopter might spot something we can't from the ground." Mason nodded, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. "First light, we'll make the call, but we keep moving until then." 20 minutes later, a young volunteer named Sophia Chen stopped suddenly, holding up her hand to signal the others. "I heard something," she whispered, turning her head to better catch the sound. The group fell silent, straining to hear anything beyond their own breathing. At first, there was nothing. Just the profound silence of a winter forest at dawn. Then faintly they caught it, a sound that didn't belong. Neither bird, nor wind, nor woodland creature. "That way," Sophia pointed, already moving, through those pines. They followed, hope giving them renewed energy as they pushed through snow-laden branches. The sound came again. Not a baby's cry as they had expected, but something else. Something that made the hair on the back of Mason's neck stand up. A low, rumbling growl. Mason instinctively reached for his sidearm, motioning for the others to stop. "Bear," he mouthed silently, pointing ahead. In winter, this was unusual and dangerous. A bear awake during hibernation season would be hungry, disoriented, and highly aggressive. "Stay back," he whispered to the team. "I'll approach slowly. Be ready to move quickly if needed." With extreme caution, Mason advanced through the trees toward a small clearing ahead. The sky was lightening now, casting a pale glow over the snow-covered ground. As he reached the edge of the clearing, he carefully parted the branches for a better view, and what he saw made him freeze in disbelief. In the center of the clearing lay a massive grizzly bear, her fur frosted with ice and snow. But it wasn't the bear alone that caused Mason's heart to nearly stop. It was what the bear was curled around, partially visible beneath one massive paw. A small bundle wrapped in pink. The bear sensed his presence immediately. She raised her head, dark eyes locking onto Mason with unmistakable warning. Her body shifted, not away from the bundle but more firmly around it, protective rather than threatening. Mason couldn't believe what he was seeing. It defied everything he knew about wildlife behavior. He carefully raised his binoculars, focusing on the bundle. Through the lenses, he could make out what appeared to be fabric, and then his breath caught a tiny human hand, pink and moving. The baby was alive. "Dear God," he whispered, overwhelmed by the impossibility of the scene before him. The bear growled again, louder this time. She rose partially to a sitting position, still keeping her body between the approaching humans and the infant. Rather than appearing menacing, her posture seemed almost maternal. Mason slowly backed away, rejoining his team with trembling hands. "What is it?" Liam asked, alarmed by Mason's expression. "You're not going to believe this," Mason said, his voice unsteady. "The baby's in the clearing, being protected by a mother grizzly." Disbelieving faces stared back at him. Sophia shook her head. "That's impossible. Bears don't. I know what bears do and don't do." Mason cut her off. "I've worked these forests for 15 years, and I'm telling you, that bear is guarding that baby like it was her own cub." The team gathered at the edge of the clearing, each verifying with their own eyes the extraordinary sight. The baby moved slightly under the bear's watchful gaze, making small sounds that were neither cries of distress nor pain, but the normal noises of an infant awakening. "How do we get to her?" Liam whispered, the impossible question hanging in the air between them. Mason's mind raced through training protocols and wildlife management techniques. Nothing had prepared him for this scenario. A mother bear would fight to the death to protect her cubs. And somehow, this bear had adopted a human child as her own. "We need tranquilizers," he finally said. "But the closest dart gun is back at the station and we don't have time. That baby needs medical attention now." Dr. Elena Castillo, who had insisted on joining the final search party despite Mason's objections, stepped forward. Her expression was determined behind her foggy glasses. "I might have a suggestion," she said quietly. "One that doesn't involve harming the bear." All eyes turned to Elena. The pediatrician had grown up in rural Alaska before medical school, a fact few in Blackwater knew about her. She understood wild animals in a way most doctors never would. "Bears have an incredibly powerful sense of smell," Elena explained, already digging through her medical bag. "And they're intelligent, much more than people give them credit for." She pulled out a small jar and a clean cloth. "This is honey mixed with a mild sedative I use for anxious children. The smell might intrigue her enough to investigate, and if she tastes it, it could make her drowsy without harming her." Mason looked skeptical. "And while the bear is sniffing honey, we just grab the baby and run. That's suicide, Elena." "Not exactly," Elena continued, her voice calm but urgent. "Bears are also remarkably sensitive to human emotion. They can sense fear and aggression, but they can sense calm too." She paused, meeting Mason's eyes. "I need to approach alone. A group will threaten her." "Absolutely not," Mason objected immediately. "That's against every protocol." "Your protocols weren't written for this situation," Elena cut in. "Look at what's happening in that clearing. That bear has been protecting that child all night. She could have killed her with a single swipe of her paw, but instead she kept her warm. There's something happening here that goes beyond normal wildlife behavior." The team fell silent, watching the extraordinary scene in the clearing. The mother bear was now gently nudging the baby with her nose, almost as if checking on her condition. The infant's arms moved slightly in response. "Every minute we wait decreases that baby's chances," Elena pressed. "I'm going in." Before anyone could stop her, Elena was removing her heavy outer coat and handing her equipment to Sophia. She kept only the jar of honey sedative mixture and a thermal emergency blanket. "If this goes wrong," Mason warned, his face grim, "we won't be able to save you." Elena nodded. "I understand." She took a deep breath, then added, "But I don't think it will go wrong. That bear made a choice last night, a choice that saved this child. I believe she'll make the right choice again." With slow, deliberate movements, Elena stepped into the clearing. The bear noticed her immediately, rising to a half-standing position, her massive head swinging toward the human intruder. A warning growl rumbled through the crisp morning air. Elena stopped, keeping her posture non-threatening, her movements slow and predictable. She began talking in a soft, even voice, not to the team behind her, but to the bear. "Hello, Mama," she said gently. "You've done something amazing, haven't you? You've been taking care of this little one all night." The bear watched intently, nostrils flaring as she assessed this new presence. Behind the trees, the rescue team held their breath, weapons ready but hoping desperately they wouldn't be needed. Elena slowly uncapped the jar, allowing the sweet scent of honey to drift toward the bear. "I know you're protecting her," she continued in the same calm voice, "and I want to thank you for that. You saved her life." To everyone's astonishment, the bear relaxed slightly, settling back down beside the baby. Her eyes remained fixed on Elena, but the aggressive posture had softened. With excruciatingly slow movements, Elena took another step forward, then another. She continued speaking in that same soothing tone, a one-sided conversation with one of nature's most dangerous predators. "I'm a doctor," she explained, as if the bear could understand. "I take care of little ones too, just like you did last night. That was extraordinary what you did." The bear huffed, sending a cloud of vapor into the cold air, but remained surprisingly calm as Elena closed the distance between them. When she was about 15 feet away, Elena knelt in the snow, making herself smaller, less threatening. She carefully set the open jar of honey-infused sedative on the ground between them, then backed up several paces, still kneeling. "This is for you," she said softly. "A thank you gift." The bear's sensitive nose twitched with interest. After a moment's hesitation, curiosity overcame caution. She stretched her neck forward, sniffing the sweet offering while keeping one paw protectively near the baby. "That's it," Elena encouraged. "It's just for you. You must be hungry after staying awake all night to watch over her." Behind the trees, Mason whispered to Liam, "I've never seen anything like this. It's like they understand each other." The bear cautiously extended her tongue, tasting the honey mixture. Finding it pleasing, she began to lap at it more eagerly. Elena remained perfectly still, watching as the bear consumed the sedative-laced treat. "You're such a good mother," Elena continued conversationally. "You knew she needed help, didn't you? Somehow you knew." The bear finished the honey and looked up at Elena with what almost seemed like understanding in her dark eyes. Then, to the amazement of everyone watching, she shifted her massive body slightly away from the bundled infant, not abandoning her charge, but creating a small space between them. It was an invitation, or at least that's how Elena chose to interpret it. "I'm going to help her now," Elena said to the bear, slowly rising from her kneeling position. "Just like you helped her. Is that okay, Mama?" The bear watched with what appeared to be curious acceptance as Elena approached the final few feet. The pediatrician's heart pounded in her chest, but her hands remained steady as she reached the baby at last. Little Olivia Bennett lay in a nest of snow that had been carefully packed down by the bear's massive paws. Her blanket, though damp, was still wrapped securely around her tiny body. With expert care, Elena quickly assessed the infant's condition. To her amazement, the baby's color was good, her breathing regular. Though cold, she wasn't showing signs of severe hypothermia. "Hello, little miracle," Elena whispered, as the baby's eyes fluttered open. Deep blue eyes gazed up at her, unfocused but alert. Olivia made a small sound, not a cry of distress, but the normal vocalization of a baby who was, impossibly, doing reasonably well after a night that should have killed her. Elena glanced at the bear, who remained just a few feet away, watching this interaction with what could only be described as maternal interest. The sedative was beginning to take effect. The large predator's eyelids looked heavy, though she remained conscious and attentive. "I'm going to take her now," Elena said softly to the bear, maintaining the strange communication that seemed to be working. "She needs to go back to her parents. You understand about parents, don't you?" With gentle, efficient movements, Elena unwrapped the damp blanket and quickly swaddled the baby in the thermal emergency blanket instead. The bear huffed softly, but made no move to interfere. If anything, she seemed to be growing drowsier by the minute, the sedative gradually taking effect. "Thank you," Elena said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "You did something impossible last night. You saved this child when no one else could." Elena slowly stood, cradling Olivia securely against her chest. The bear's eyes followed her movements, but her massive head now rested heavily on her paws. The sedative wasn't strong enough for full unconsciousness. Elena had been cautious with the dosage, but it was enough to keep the animal calm and relaxed while they made their escape. Step by careful step, Elena backed away toward the tree line where the rest of the team waited. The bear watched them go, making no attempt to follow. As Elena reached the safety of the trees, the tension broke. Mason and Liam rushed forward to meet her, their faces registering disbelief and wonder. "She's alive," Elena confirmed, her voice breaking with emotion. "And she's in remarkably good condition. Her core temperature is lower than ideal, but nowhere near fatal levels. It's a miracle." "How is this possible?" Sophia asked, staring at the baby in amazement, then looking back at the bear who still lay in the clearing, her massive head now drooping with drowsiness. "The bear's body heat," Elena explained. "She kept the baby pressed against her all night. Grizzlies maintain an internal temperature of about 101 degrees even in winter conditions. She was essentially a living furnace." Mason shook his head in wonder. "In 20 years of wildlife management, I've never seen or heard of anything like this. Bears don't protect humans. They see us as threats or prey." "This one didn't," Elena said simply, looking back at the massive creature who was now closing her eyes, succumbing to the mild sedative. "This one saw a baby in need and chose to help." They quickly made their way back through the forest, taking turns carrying the precious bundle. Elena continuously monitored Olivia's vital signs, which remained remarkably stable. The baby occasionally whimpered, but seemed surprisingly content given her ordeal. When they reached the ranger station 2 hours later, the scene that unfolded brought everyone to tears. Catherine and James Bennett, who had spent the night in a torment of guilt and grief, looked up as the door opened. For a moment, they didn't comprehend what they were seeing. Couldn't allow themselves to hope. "Olivia?" Catherine whispered, rising shakily to her feet. "Is that—" "It's her," Elena confirmed, crossing the room to place the baby in her mother's trembling arms. "And she's going to be just fine." Catherine collapsed to her knees, clutching her daughter to her chest, her body racked with sobs of relief and disbelief. James knelt beside them, his arms encircling his family, his face buried in his wife's shoulder as he wept openly. "How?" James finally managed to ask, looking up at the rescue team with red-rimmed eyes. "How did she survive the night?" The room fell silent. How could they possibly explain what they had witnessed? It defied belief, defied everything known about wildlife behavior and survival odds. Mason stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Your daughter was saved by a mother grizzly bear," he said simply. "The bear found her, kept her warm, and protected her all night." Catherine and James stared at him in shock and disbelief. "A bear?" Catherine repeated. "But bears are—" "Predators, yes," Elena interjected gently. "But this one chose to nurture rather than harm. She curled around Olivia, shared her body heat, and kept her safe until we found them." That's impossible," James stammered. "We all saw it," Sophia confirmed. "The bear was treating your baby like it was her own cub. Dr. Castillo walked right up to them, and the bear actually moved aside to let her take Olivia." Catherine looked down at her daughter, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms, then back at the rescue team. "You're serious? A wild bear protected our baby?" "Yes," Elena said firmly, "and I believe she saved Olivia's life. Without that bear's body heat, no infant could have survived those temperatures overnight." The room fell silent as the implications of this extraordinary event sank in. It was more than a rescue. It was something that challenged their fundamental understanding of the natural world and the boundaries between species. In the days that followed, Olivia's story spread far beyond the small town of Blackwater. Local news covered the miraculous rescue first, but soon national networks were sending crews to interview Mason, Elena, and the rest of the rescue team. The Bennetts found themselves at the center of media attention, with their daughter being called the Bear Cub Baby and the Miracle of Blackwater Forest. Wildlife experts from around the country debated the event, many dismissing it as exaggeration or misinterpretation. Bears don't protect human babies, they insisted on television panels and radio shows. It's biologically impossible. The rescuers must have misunderstood what they were seeing. But those who had been there knew the truth. They had witnessed something that defied explanation but was nonetheless real. A wild mother bear who had chosen compassion over instinct, nurturing over nature. A week after the rescue, when the media frenzy had begun to die down, Mason Harper drove his truck along the snow-covered forest road. Beside him sat Elena, and in the back seat Catherine Bennett held her now healthy daughter. The Bennetts had requested this trip, needing to see the place where the miracle had happened. "We're almost there," Mason said, turning onto a narrow track that was barely visible beneath the snow. "About a quarter mile ahead is the clearing." Catherine looked down at Olivia, who was alert and peaceful in her arms. The baby showed no lasting effects from her night in the wilderness. No frostbite, no trauma, just a healthy 3-month-old with a story no one would believe when she grew up. "Do you think—" Catherine hesitated. "Do you think the bear is still around?" Mason exchanged a glance with Elena. "It's unlikely," he said gently. "After the sedative wore off, she probably returned to hibernation. Bears don't usually stay active in winter unless disturbed." They parked where the forest road ended and continued on foot, Mason and Elena breaking trail through the deep snow, while Catherine followed with Olivia, bundled securely against her chest. James had stayed behind in town, still too shaken by the near tragedy to revisit the site. When they reached the edge of the clearing, they stopped. The place looked different in daylight, peaceful and beautiful rather than forbidding. Fresh snow had covered any traces of the drama that had unfolded there. "This is it?" Catherine asked softly. Mason nodded. "Right there," he pointed to the center of the clearing. "That's where we found them together." Catherine stood silently for a long moment, taking in the scene. Then, to Mason and Elena's surprise, she stepped forward into the clearing, walking slowly to the spot Mason had indicated. "Catherine," Elena called worriedly, "we shouldn't linger here too long." But Catherine seemed not to hear her. She stood in the center of the clearing, looking around as if trying to absorb every detail, to understand what had happened in this place. Then she gently unwrapped Olivia's face from the protective layers of her winter clothing, allowing the baby to look around at the snowy forest. "I wanted her to see it," Catherine explained when Mason and Elena joined her, "even though she won't remember. I wanted her to feel this place once more." Her voice broke. "The place where she was saved by something I can't even explain." Elena placed a comforting hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Some things in life don't need explanations," she said quietly. "They just need to be honored." As if in response, Olivia made a happy gurgling sound, her tiny mittened hand reaching upward toward the snow-laden branches overhead. The 3 adults smiled at her innocent wonder, so untouched by the near tragedy that had occurred. Then, from the dense line of trees at the far edge of the clearing, came a sound, a soft huffing noise that made Mason freeze instantly. "Don't move," he whispered, his hand instinctively going to the tranquilizer gun he now carried at all times. "That's her." There, half hidden among the shadowy pines, stood the mother grizzly. Her brown fur stood out against the white snow, her massive form unmistakable even at a distance. She should have been hibernating, conserving energy for the barren winter months. Instead, she was here, watching them, Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Is she dangerous now? Stay very still, Mason cautioned, slowly raising his gun. Bears are unpredictable, even this one. But Elena's hand on his arm stopped him. Wait, she whispered. Look at her. She's not threatening us. She's just watching. The bear made no move to approach. She simply stood there, her dark eyes fixed not on the adults, but on the small bundle in Catherine's arms. After a long moment, the great animal rose briefly on her hind legs, not in aggression, but as if to get a better look. Then she dropped back to all fours, gave one last soft huff, and turned away, disappearing back into the shadowy forest. Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she clutched Olivia closer. She came to see her, she whispered. She came to see that Olivia was okay. Mason shook his head in wonder. I can't explain it, he admitted. In all my years working with wildlife, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if she knows, Elena finished softly. As if she understands exactly what she did. They stood in silence for several minutes more, the forest quiet around them except for the occasional soft sound of snow falling from branches. Finally, Catherine turned to head back, but before leaving the clearing she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Thank you, she said, her words carrying clearly in the still winter air. The words weren't meant for Mason or Elena. They were for someone else. Someone who would never understand human language, but had somehow understood the most fundamental language of all, the silent cry of a child in need. The story of the mother bear and baby Olivia became legend in Blackwater. Over the years, it would be told and retold, sometimes embellished, sometimes dismissed as fantasy. Wildlife biologists would study the case and propose theories. Perhaps the bear had recently lost cubs, and her maternal hormones were still active. Perhaps the human baby's cries triggered some cross-species maternal response. Perhaps it was nothing more than a bizarre anomaly. But for those who had witnessed it firsthand, no scientific explanation could capture the full truth of what had happened in that snowy forest clearing. They had seen something rare and precious, a moment when the boundaries between species dissolved, when the rigid laws of nature bent in service to something greater, compassion that transcended the divide between human and animal. And little Olivia Bennet grew up knowing that her life had been saved by an unlikely guardian angel with fur and claws, and a heart big enough to recognize a child of another species as worthy of protection. Each winter, on the anniversary of that night, the Bennet family would make a special trip to the edge of Blackwater Forest. They would leave a jar of honey at the tree line, a small gesture of gratitude for an act of mercy they could never fully repay. And sometimes, though no one could prove it, people claimed to see a large grizzly bear watching from a distance, as if remembering the night she had defied every natural instinct to save a child who was not her own. In a world often divided by difference, the story of the bear and the baby remained a powerful reminder that compassion knows no boundaries, that even in the harshest conditions, warmth can be found in the most unexpected places. 3 years passed since that miraculous night in Blackwater Forest. The story had faded from national headlines, but its impact continued to resonate deeply within the community. The Bennet family had moved into a modest house on the outskirts of town, closer to the forest edge, a decision that surprised many but made perfect sense to those who understood their unique connection to those woods. Olivia Bennet was now a spirited 3-year-old with curly brown hair and unusually intelligent eyes. Despite her young age, she seemed to possess an innate affinity for animals that bordered on extraordinary. The local veterinarian, Dr. Martin Reeves, had remarked on it during Olivia's first visit with their newly adopted puppy, "I've never seen anything like it," he had told Catherine in hushed tones. Most children her age would be frightened by large animals, but she walked right up to that St. Bernard in the waiting room without a hint of fear. It's as if she inherently trusts them. Catherine had simply smiled. "She has her reasons," she'd replied. On a crisp autumn morning, Catherine sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of mail while Olivia played with wooden blocks on the floor nearby. A letter with an official-looking seal caught her attention. She opened it carefully, her eyes widening as she scanned its contents. "James," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you come here a moment?" Her husband appeared from his home office, where he had been working on architectural designs. Since the incident, he had shifted his career to focus on sustainable forest habitats, a change inspired by their experience. "What is it?" he asked, noting her expression. Catherine handed him the letter. "It's from the National Wildlife Conservation Foundation. They want to interview us, and they want to make a documentary about what happened with Olivia and the bear." James read the letter carefully, his brow furrowing. "We've turned down every request for the past 2 years. What makes this one different?" "Look who's leading the project," Catherine said, pointing to a name at the bottom of the page. James's eyebrows raised in surprise. "Dr. Elena Castillo? I thought she moved to Montana for that research position." "Apparently she's back," Catherine said, "and she wants to document the complete story, not as some sensationalized miracle, but as a scientific case study on interspecies behavior." They glanced at Olivia, who was completely absorbed in building a tower with her blocks, blissfully unaware of her own extraordinary history. Despite her young age, they had begun sharing simplified versions of her story. "Your bear angel," they called the grizzly, framing the experience as a beautiful fairy tale, rather than the near tragedy it had been. "What do you think?" James asked hesitantly. "We've always been private about this." Catherine was silent for a moment, watching her daughter play. "I think maybe it's time," she finally said. "Elena was there, she understands. And she's a scientist. She won't sensationalize it." She took a deep breath. "Besides, that bear did something impossible to save our daughter. Maybe understanding why could help change how people see wildlife. Help protect animals like her." James nodded slowly. "Let's call Elena first before we decide." Later that afternoon, as autumn sunlight slanted through the kitchen windows, they sat across from Elena Castillo, who looked much as she had 3 years ago. Perhaps a few more lines around her eyes, her dark hair now streaked with the occasional strand of silver, but with the same calm, determined presence that had allowed her to approach a wild bear without fear. "I understand your hesitation," Elena said, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea. "The media circus back then was overwhelming." "It's not just that," Catherine explained, glancing toward the living room where Olivia was napping. We've tried to create a normal life for her. We don't want her to be the bear girl forever. She deserves her own identity." Elena nodded. "I completely respect that. That's why this project is different. It's not about sensationalizing Olivia's story. It's about understanding something profound about animal behavior that challenges our most basic assumptions." She leaned forward. "But I want to be clear, I won't proceed without your full blessing. This is your family's story first, a scientific phenomenon second." James, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Have you found other cases? Other examples of wild predators protecting human children?" Elena's expression brightened. "That's part of why I'm so interested in documenting this properly. We've identified 7 other potential cases in the last century, from a lioness in Kenya who guarded a lost child for nearly 2 days to a wolf pack in northern Russia that allegedly surrounded a young boy who had wandered from his village during a blizzard. None of those cases were properly documented, she continued. They all exist as local legends, dismissed by the scientific community. But after what I witnessed with Olivia, she shook her head in wonder. I believe there's something profound here that deserves serious study. Catherine and James exchanged a look, years of unspoken communication passing between them. What would this involve exactly? Catherine asked cautiously. Interviews primarily, Elena explained. With you, with Mason, and the other rescuers. We'd visit the site, though filming would be minimal and respectful. I'd also like to incorporate Olivia in a very limited way, perhaps just some footage of her interacting with domestic animals, to show her unusual comfort with them. Nothing that would identify her to strangers or disrupt her normal life. As they discussed the details, a small voice came from the doorway. "Mama, I'm thirsty." All three adults turned to see Olivia standing there, her dark curls tousled from her nap. A stuffed bear clutched tightly in one arm. The toy had been a gift from Mason Harper on her first birthday, a small brown grizzly with gentle eyes and a kind expression. Nothing like the fearsome depictions of bears in most children's toys. Elena's breath caught at the sight of the child. The last time she had seen Olivia, she had been a tiny infant, miraculously alive after a night that should have killed her. Now she was a living, breathing miracle. A vibrant little girl with rosy cheeks and bright eyes, showing no trace of her harrowing beginning. "Hello, Olivia," Elena said gently. "Do you remember me? I'm an old friend of your parents." Olivia regarded her solemnly, then shook her head. But I like your necklace." She pointed to the small silver pendant Elena wore, a detailed bear paw print that had been a gift from her Alaskan grandmother. Elena smiled, touching the pendant. "Thank you. It reminds me of someone very special." Catherine got up to pour Olivia a small cup of water. As she handed it to her daughter, she asked, "Olivia, honey, how would you feel about going on a special trip to the forest soon, to see the place where your bear angel watched over you?" Olivia's eyes widened with interest. "Can we bring honey?" "Daddy says we always bring honey for Bear Angel." James chuckled. "We do, that's right, but this would be a bit different. Dr. Elena here is a scientist who wants to learn about your Bear Angel. She might bring a camera to take pictures." Olivia considered this with surprising seriousness for a 3-year-old. "Will we see Bear Angel?" The adults exchanged glances. "Probably not, sweetheart," Catherine explained gently. "Bear Angel only comes out at special times, but we can visit her forest and tell Dr. Elena all about her." This seemed to satisfy Olivia. She nodded decisively. "Okay, can I wear my bear boots?" Catherine laughed. "Yes, you can wear your bear boots." After Olivia had returned to the living room, Elena spoke quietly. "She's remarkable, so poised for her age." "She's always been unusually calm," James confirmed. "The pediatrician says she's advanced for her age in almost every metric, especially emotional regulation and environmental awareness. We sometimes wonder if that night changed her somehow," Catherine finished. "If connecting with a wild animal at such a young age affected her development." Elena looked thoughtful. "It's not impossible. There's growing research about how early experiences shape neural pathways. Your daughter formed a connection with a wild predator during a critical developmental stage. That's unprecedented." The three continued their discussion, eventually agreeing to proceed with the documentary under careful conditions that would protect Olivia's privacy and well-being. As Elena prepared to leave, Catherine walked her to the door. "There's something I haven't told James," Catherine confessed in a hushed tone. Something that's happened several times now. Elena paused, her expression curious. What is it? When I take Olivia to the edge of the forest for walks, just the normal hiking trails, she sometimes stops and stares into the woods. The first time it happened, she was barely 2, not really talking much yet. She pointed into the trees and said, clear as day, "Bear." Catherine swallowed hard. There was nothing there that I could see, but she was so certain. It's happened 3 more times since then. Elena's scientific mind immediately began considering explanations. Children have incredible imaginations, especially when they've been told stories. That's what I told myself too, Catherine interrupted gently. Until last month. We were on the Aspen Trail, and Olivia did it again, stopped suddenly and said, "Bear watching." I humored her, pretending to look where she was pointing, and then she took a shaky breath. I saw it. Just for a moment, partially hidden behind a fallen log. A grizzly, watching us from about 50 yards away. Elena's eyes widened. Are you certain? Grizzly sightings are extremely rare in these parts. I've seen enough pictures to know, Catherine said firmly. It was a grizzly bear, and it was watching us. When I grabbed Olivia to leave, she wasn't frightened at all. She waved and said, "Bye, Bear Angel," as I carried her away. Elena was silent for a long moment. Have you reported these sightings? Catherine shook her head. You know what would happen. They'd send out wildlife management. They'd consider a bear too close to hiking trails as a threat. She met Elena's eyes. I couldn't bear the thought of them hurting her, if it is her. The chances of it being the same bear... Elena began, then stopped herself. But then again, the chances of a bear protecting a human infant were virtually 0, and yet it happened. She considered this new information carefully. I'll need to think about how to approach this. Safety has to be our priority, especially with Olivia involved. Catherine nodded. I understand. Just, please be careful with this information. James worries enough as it is. As Elena drove back to her temporary housing in Blackwater, her mind raced with the implications of Catherine's revelation. If the same bear was indeed monitoring Olivia from a distance, it would be unprecedented, suggesting not just a momentary maternal instinct, but a long-term bond that defied all scientific understanding of wild animal behavior. The implications were both thrilling and concerning. A wild predator with an apparent attachment to a human child posed obvious safety questions. Yet, the possibility of documenting such behavior could revolutionize understanding of animal cognition and interspecies relationships. One thing was certain. The story of Olivia and the mother bear was far from over. It was, perhaps, just beginning. 2 weeks later, preparations for the documentary were underway. Elena had assembled a small team of trusted colleagues. A wildlife photographer named Miguel Santos, who specialized in non-invasive observation. Dr. Rebecca Winters, a renowned animal behaviorist from the University of Washington. And a sound technician named Tyler Kim, who had extensive experience working in sensitive forest environments. The key is minimal disruption, Elena explained during their first planning meeting in the conference room of Blackwater's small ranger station. We're not making a Hollywood production. We're creating a scientific record. Mason Harper, now the head ranger of Blackwater National Forest, leaned against the doorframe. The years had added a few more silver strands to his hair, but his eyes were as sharp and observant as ever. I've approved permits for your team to access the restricted areas, he said, placing a folder on the table. But I need to be clear about something. This forest is still recovering from the wildfire 2 summers ago. The bear population has shifted territories, and their behaviors have been more unpredictable. Elena nodded. We'll follow all safety protocols. No one goes anywhere alone, and we'll have tranquilizer equipment on hand at all times, though I hope we won't need it." "And the Bennetts?" Mason asked. "Are they still comfortable with this project?" "Yes," Elena confirmed. "We've agreed that Olivia's participation will be minimal. She'll visit the edge of the forest with her parents once, but most of the documentary will focus on the scientific aspects and interviews with the rescue team." What Elena didn't mention was her private conversation with Catherine about the possible bear sightings. She had decided to investigate quietly before raising alarms or including it in the documentary scope. The next day, Elena visited the Bennett's home to review the filming schedule. She arrived to find an unexpected guest, Sophia Chen, the young volunteer who had first heard the bears growl during the search for Olivia. Now, an environmental science graduate student, Sophia had remained close with the Bennett family. "Sophia's been babysitting Olivia since she was 1, Catherine explained as they settled in the living room. "They have a special bond." Olivia sat on the floor near Sophia's feet, arranging a collection of animal figurines in a complex pattern that seemed far too sophisticated for a typical 3-year-old. "What are you building there, Olivia?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. "It's a forest family," Olivia explained, without looking up. "Everyone has their place." Elena watched as the child deliberately positioned each animal. In the center was a bear figurine, surrounded by smaller animals, deer, rabbits, foxes, arranged in concentric circles. At the edge of the arrangement, Olivia carefully placed a small human figure. "And who's that?" Elena asked, pointing to the human toy. "That's me," Olivia said simply. "I'm waiting to be invited closer." The adults exchanged glances. There was something uncanny about the child's arrangement and explanation, something that hinted at a worldview most humans lost before they could even speak. Sophia seemed less surprised than the others. "She does this all the time," she explained. "Creates these elaborate animal communities. She has an amazing understanding of ecosystem relationships for her age." Elena made a mental note to interview Sophia more extensively. The young woman had been present during the rescue and had maintained a close relationship with Olivia during her development. Her observations could provide valuable insights. The meeting continued, with discussions about filming locations and schedules. Throughout the conversation, Elena noticed how Olivia, though apparently playing independently, seemed to register certain words and phrases. When Mason Harper's name was mentioned, she looked up. When Catherine talked about the forest clearing, Olivia's hands stilled momentarily. The child was absorbing everything, even while appearing occupied with her own activities. As the meeting concluded and Elena prepared to leave, Olivia approached her with a drawing. A child's illustration done in crayon, but with surprising detail for one so young. It showed a large brown shape that was clearly meant to be a bear, standing beside a much smaller figure with curly hair. "This is for your bear story," Olivia said, handing it to Elena. "So you remember?" "Remember what, sweetheart?" Elena asked gently. Olivia looked at her with those unusually perceptive eyes. "That we're friends." Something about the child's certainty sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Not of fear, but of wonder. It was as if Olivia possessed some innate knowledge that the adults around her were still struggling to comprehend. "I'll keep it safe," Elena promised, carefully placing the drawing in her folder. "Thank you." As Elena drove back to her temporary office, her phone rang. It was Rebecca Winters, the animal behaviorist. "Elena, I've been reviewing the witness accounts from 3 years ago," Rebecca said without preamble. "I have questions about the bear's behavior that aren't addressed in the reports." "What kind of questions?" Elena asked, putting the call on speaker as she navigated the winding forest road. The reports describe the bear as protective and maternal, but I need more specific behavioral markers. Was she displaying typical maternal postures? Was there throat rumbling, which indicates comfort communication to cubs? Did she show any resource-guarding behaviors with the child? Elena smiled slightly. Rebecca was renowned for her scientific thoroughness. I'll share my full notes with you. But yes, to answer your immediate questions, her posture was protective but not aggressive. She maintained physical contact with the infant throughout the night, based on the condition of the scene when we found them, and she was reluctant to surrender the child initially, though she didn't display typical resource-guarding aggression. Fascinating, Rebecca replied, and completely contrary to everything we know about Ursine behavior toward humans. I've studied bear-human interactions for 20 years, and I've never documented a case of genuine nurturing behavior toward humans. Avoidance or aggression are the standard responses. That's why this case is so important, Elena said. It challenges our fundamental understanding of interspecies boundaries. After ending the call, Elena took a detour. Instead of returning directly to her office, she drove to the Forest Service access road that led closest to the clearing where Olivia had been found. She had no intention of entering the forest alone. That would violate all the safety protocols she herself had established. But she wanted to see the area again, to refresh her memory before filming began. The access gate was locked, as expected, but from the small gravel pullout she could see into the first line of trees. Autumn was painting the forest in brilliant hues of red and gold, so different from the stark white landscape of that winter night 3 years ago. Yet the essential character of the place remained, ancient, watchful, filled with secrets most humans would never comprehend. As Elena stood there, making notes on her tablet about potential camera positions, a movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. She turned slowly, scanning the forest edge. Nothing seemed out of place. Wind rustled the leaves, sending a shower of golden aspen leaves spiraling to the ground. A squirrel darted up a nearby trunk. Typical forest activity. Elena was about to return to her vehicle when she noticed it. A slight shifting of shadow beneath a stand of dense pines about 50 yards into the forest. She stilled, focusing her attention on the spot without making any sudden movements. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadow resolved itself into a distinct form, the unmistakable silhouette of a bear, standing motionless among the trees, watching her. Elena's breath caught. Though she had approached a bear once before in extraordinary circumstances, she was acutely aware of the danger. This was a wild predator, powerful enough to kill her with a single blow. Yet fear was not her dominant emotion. Rather, she felt a profound sense of recognition, as if she were in the presence of an old acquaintance. "Hello?" she said softly, the word barely carrying on the gentle breeze. "Remember me?" The bear made no sound, no movement. It simply watched, its dark eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight that filtered through the canopy. Elena remained perfectly still, unwilling to do anything that might frighten the animal away or provoke a defensive response. For nearly 2 minutes, this silent observation continued. Human and bear, researcher and subject, each assessing the other across an ancient divide. Then, with a fluid grace that belied its massive size, the bear turned and moved deeper into the forest, disappearing among the trees as silently as it had appeared. Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled slightly as she quickly documented what she had seen. Approximate size, coloration, behavior. Though she couldn't be certain it was the same bear from 3 years ago, the location and behavior were suggestive. This required further investigation, but with proper safety measures in place. As she drove back to town, Elena's mind was racing. Catherine's story about Olivia sensing the bear's presence no longer seemed like a mother's imagination or a child's fancy. There was something happening here that demanded scientific attention, a possible ongoing relationship between a wild bear and the human child it had once saved. The implications were both thrilling and concerning. If confirmed, it would challenge foundational assumptions about wildlife behavior and human-animal interactions. But it also introduced complex ethical and safety considerations, especially with a young child involved. That evening, Elena made a difficult decision. She would not yet tell the Bennetts about her sighting. Without more data, it would only increase their anxiety. Instead, she would accelerate the documentary timeline and implement additional safety protocols. The first step would be to set up remote wildlife cameras around the perimeter of the clearing. Not close enough to disturb any animals, but positioned to capture evidence of bear activity in the area. "We need to be methodical about this," she told Miguel, her wildlife photographer, over dinner at Blackwater's small diner. "If there is a resident bear showing unusual interest in humans or human locations, we need to document it properly." Miguel nodded, his expression serious. "I've worked in bear country from Alaska to the Rockies. If you're right, and this is the same bear from 3 years ago, it's unprecedented. Bears simply don't maintain interest in human subjects over time, unless they're habituated to human food sources, which is a different problem entirely." "That's what makes this case so extraordinary," Elena replied. "There's no food conditioning here. The Bennetts haven't been feeding bears. This appears to be a genuine social or emotional connection, which contradicts everything we understand about wild predator behavior." The next morning, with proper permits and safety equipment, Elena and Miguel ventured into the forest with Mason Harper as their guide. They set up 5 motion-activated wildlife cameras around the perimeter of the clearing, camouflaged and positioned high in trees to prevent tampering or damage from curious animals. "These will transmit images in real time to our secure server," Miguel explained as he adjusted the final camera. "If anything larger than a coyote moves through this area, we'll know about it." Mason, who'd been quiet throughout most of the installation process, finally spoke. "I've been thinking about something. When we found the baby that morning, the bear had clearly been with her all night. The snow was packed down where she'd been lying, and there were no other animal tracks nearby." "That's right," Elena confirmed. "The bear effectively created a shelter and kept predators away." "But that's not what's bothering me," Mason continued. "What's strange is that the bear was awake at all. February in these mountains. Every bear should be deep in hibernation. It would take something significant to rouse a female bear from her winter den." Elena considered this. "You're right. Bears don't typically become active until late March or April around here. What would wake a hibernating bear in the dead of winter?" "That's what I can't figure," Mason admitted. "In 20 years of wildlife management, I've only seen it happen when a den is disturbed by humans or predators, or if unusual weather patterns trigger early awakening. But that night was a typical winter storm, severe, but not exceptional for these parts." "Could she have heard the baby crying?" Miguel suggested. "Bears have excellent hearing." Mason shook his head. "Not from a hibernation state and not at any significant distance. When bears hibernate, their heart rate drops to about 8 to 10 beats per minute. They're essentially in a deep torpor. Something had to wake this bear before she heard the baby." Elena made a note of this observation. It was yet another anomaly in an already extraordinary case, a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit conventional wildlife behavior patterns. They finished setting up the cameras by mid-afternoon and returned to town. That evening, Elena met with the full documentary team to review their progress and the filming schedule. "The Bennetts will visit the site with us next week," she informed them. "It will be Olivia's first time returning to the clearing since she was an infant. I want absolute minimal crew presence. Just myself, Miguel for photography, and Tyler for sound. Everyone else will monitor from the base camp we'll set up at the forest access point." Rebecca Winters, the animal behaviorist, raised a concern. "If there is an active bear in the area showing interest in this location or these people, bringing a child there introduces significant risk." "Mason will be with us, armed with tranquilizers," Elena assured her, "and will only proceed if the wildlife cameras show no recent large predator activity in the immediate area." The team continued discussing safety protocols and filming objectives, unaware that the first of their wildlife cameras was already capturing something remarkable. At the edge of the clearing, moving with deliberate purpose through the evening shadows, a large grizzly bear appeared in the frame. The animal paused, sniffing the air where humans had walked earlier that day. Then, with what almost appeared to be caution, it approached the exact center of the clearing, the spot where 3 years earlier a baby had been found in its protective embrace. The bear circled the area slowly, nose to the ground, following the scent trail left by Elena, Miguel, and Mason. It showed particular interest in a spot where Elena had paused longest, near the tree where they had mounted one of the cameras. When the footage was automatically uploaded to the team's server an hour later, it triggered an alert on Elena's laptop. She stared at the screen in astonishment as the video played. The bear's behavior was methodical, investigative, almost as if it were conducting its own research on the humans who had visited its territory. "This changes everything," Elena whispered to herself, immediately reaching for her phone to call Mason. The documentary they had planned was about a remarkable past event. But what they were potentially documenting now was even more extraordinary. An ongoing, intentional connection between a wild predator and the humans who had shared a life-changing encounter years before. Mason arrived at Elena's temporary office within 30 minutes, his expression grave as he reviewed the footage. "Female grizzly, approximately 8 to 10 years old based on size and movement patterns," he observed, his trained eye picking up details that even Elena had missed. "Healthy coat, good weight, no visible tags or tracking collar. Do you think it could be her?" Elena asked, the question they were both considering. Mason rewound the footage, studying the bear's distinctive facial markings and the pattern of lighter fur across her shoulders. "I can't be 100% certain without DNA confirmation, but there's a strong resemblance to the bear from 3 years ago." He paused the video where the bear's face was most clearly visible. "See this notch in her right ear, and the scar pattern along her muzzle. Those are consistent with my memory of the bear that protected Olivia." Elena felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension. "This completely changes our approach. If she's actively monitoring this location, possibly maintaining some form of connection to the events that happened there, we need to be extremely careful about bringing the Bennetts to the site." "I agree," Mason said firmly, "but I'm also concerned about something else. This bear is showing unusual interest in human scents and a human-frequented location. In any other circumstance, I'd classify that as potential habituation, a dangerous condition that often leads to bears being euthanized." "But this isn't food conditioning or typical habituation," Elena countered. "This appears to be a specific social or emotional connection to specific humans or a specific event. That's unprecedented in scientific literature." Mason nodded slowly. "Which is why we need to proceed with extreme caution. If other rangers or wildlife officials observe this behavior without context, they might make management decisions that none of us want." He didn't need to elaborate on what those management decisions might entail. "So, what do we do?" Elena asked. "Cancel the Bennetts' visit to the site?" Mason considered this carefully. "No, but we modify our approach. I want 2 additional rangers present with tranquilizer rifles. We create a secure perimeter before bringing the family in. And we limit the visit to 30 minutes, maximum." Elena agreed to these terms, recognizing the delicate balance they needed to maintain between scientific documentation, the Bennetts' emotional journey, and safety for all involved, including the bear. The next question was whether to share the footage with Catherine and James. After much discussion, Elena and Mason decided transparency was essential, especially given Catherine's previous mention of bear sightings near Olivia. That evening, they visited the Bennett home after Olivia had been put to bed. In the quiet living room, illuminated only by a small table lamp, they showed the footage to Catherine and James. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. "It's her," she whispered with absolute certainty. "The same bear I saw watching us on the trail." James, who had been skeptical of his wife's previous sightings, stared at the screen in disbelief. "How is this possible? Why would a wild bear maintain interest in humans over years?" "That's what we're trying to understand," Elena explained gently. "There are documented cases of elephants remembering specific humans for decades, and certain primates maintaining recognition of human caregivers after long separations. But this level of apparent connection between a wild bear and humans is uncharted territory." "What does this mean for our visit to the site?" Catherine asked, her protective maternal instinct clearly engaged. "We've enhanced security protocols," Mason assured them. "We believe it can still proceed safely, but you need to be aware of this development and comfortable with the additional precautions we're implementing." James looked troubled. "And if we encounter this bear, what then?" "We'll have tranquilizer equipment ready," Mason explained. "But based on all observations, both from 3 years ago and the recent footage, this particular bear has shown no aggression toward your family. If anything, the behavior suggests protective or investigative interest." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then asked a question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Do you think she remembers? That she somehow knows Olivia is the baby she saved?" Elena exchanged glances with Mason. This was where science met something less definable, something that challenged conventional understanding of animal cognition. "Bears have excellent long-term memory, particularly for locations and food sources," Elena said carefully. "They can remember productive berry patches or fishing spots for years. But recognizing a specific human child after significant growth and change, that would suggest cognitive abilities beyond what we currently attribute to bears. Yet she found Olivia in the first place," Catherine pointed out softly, "when all logic says she should have either ignored her or, worse." The implication hung in the air. By all natural laws, a wild bear encountering a helpless human infant should have seen either a threat to be avoided or prey to be consumed. Instead, this bear had made a decision that defied explanation, and appeared to be maintaining some form of connection to that decision years later. "We need to approach this with both scientific rigor and an open mind," Elena finally said. "Whatever is happening here challenges our understanding of wildlife behavior. It deserves careful, respectful documentation." James and Catherine agreed to proceed with the planned visit to the clearing, though with clear reservations on James's part. As Elena and Mason prepared to leave, Catherine pulled Elena aside in the hallway. "There's something else," she said in a low voice. "Something I haven't told anyone, not even James." She hesitated, then continued. "The night after we brought Olivia home from the hospital, after her rescue, I had a dream. I was in the forest, watching from above as if I were floating among the trees. I could see the bear curled around Olivia in the snow, but in the dream I could feel what the bear was feeling. Elena listened without interruption, recognizing the importance of Catherine's confidence. She was grieving, Catherine continued, her voice catching slightly. Grieving for cubs she had lost. When she found Olivia, it was like something broken inside her had a chance to heal, like they needed each other. Catherine wiped a tear from her cheek. I know it was just a dream, but it felt so real, and sometimes I wonder if there's more connecting us to animals than we understand. Elena squeezed Catherine's hand gently. Throughout human history, across cultures, people have described spiritual or emotional connections to animals that science hasn't been able to fully explain. I'm a scientist, but I'm also someone who witnessed something extraordinary in those woods. I believe there are still mysteries in the relationship between humans and animals that we haven't unraveled. The day of the Bennett family's visit to the clearing dawned clear and crisp. The forest was ablaze with autumn colors, so different from the snow-covered landscape of that fateful winter night. As planned, Mason and 2 additional rangers secured the perimeter before Elena and her small film crew arrived with the family. Olivia was dressed in her favorite outfit, tiny hiking boots with bear faces on them, jeans, and a puffy blue jacket. She held tightly to her parents' hands as they walked the carefully marked path toward the clearing, her eyes wide with wonder at the colorful autumn forest. "Is this where Bear Angel found me?" she asked, her voice small but unafraid. "Yes, sweetheart," Catherine answered, squeezing her daughter's hand. "This is the special place." As they approached the edge of the clearing, Mason raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. He scanned the area carefully, then nodded for them to proceed. The camera crew maintained a respectful distance, capturing the family's emotional return without intruding on the moment. When they reached the center of the clearing, James lifted Olivia into his arms. "Right here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is where you were found, safe and warm, when we thought we'd lost you forever." Olivia looked around, taking in the sunlight filtering through golden leaves, so different from the snowy night of her rescue. "It's pretty here," she observed simply. Elena watched as Catherine knelt down, touching the earth with trembling fingers. "I never thought I'd have the courage to come back to this place," she admitted quietly. "But being here now, I just feel grateful." The family stood together in reflective silence, the only sounds the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional call of birds overhead. Elena gave a subtle signal to Miguel to capture this moment, the perfect emotional core of their documentary. Then something extraordinary happened. Olivia suddenly turned her head, looking intently toward the eastern edge of the clearing. "She's here," the child said with absolute certainty. Every adult froze. Mason and the rangers immediately raised their tranquilizer rifles, scanning the tree line. But there was nothing visible. No movement, no sound that human ears could detect. "Olivia, honey," James began nervously, "there's nothing." "She's watching," Olivia insisted calmly. "She's saying hello." Catherine knelt beside her daughter, looking in the same direction. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Olivia nodded with the unwavering confidence of a child who hasn't yet learned to doubt her perceptions. "She remembers me." Elena and Mason exchanged glances. Was this simply a child's imagination, fueled by the stories she'd been told? Or was Olivia somehow perceiving something the adults could not? As if in answer, a cloud shadow passed over the clearing, briefly dimming the sunlight. In that moment, at the exact spot where Olivia was looking, there was a subtle movement among the trees. just for a second, so quick that later, reviewing the footage, they would debate whether it had been there at all. The distinctive silhouette of a bear was visible, standing on its hind legs, watching. Then it was gone, melting back into the forest without a sound. Mason lowered his rifle slowly. "Did anyone else see that?" he asked quietly. Elena nodded, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes had witnessed. "The cameras should have captured it," she said. "We'll review the footage later." But it was Catherine who understood the moment most clearly. Kneeling beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face, she whispered, "She came to say goodbye, didn't she?" Olivia turned to her mother with those wise eyes that seemed to hold knowledge beyond her years. "Not goodbye," she corrected gently. She said, "I'll always watch over you." James, the most skeptical among them, found himself without words. He simply gathered his family close, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name: gratitude, wonder, and a profound sense that the world was more mysterious and beautiful than he had ever understood. In the months that followed, Elena's documentary was completed and released to critical acclaim. The Guardian Bear challenged scientific understanding of animal cognition and interspecies relationships, sparking debate and further research into the emotional capabilities of wild animals. The wildlife cameras remained in place for a year, occasionally capturing glimpses of the same female grizzly moving through the forest. She never approached human habitations or showed interest in human food sources. Her only unusual behavior was her periodic visits to the clearing, always at dawn or dusk, always alone, always watchful. Mason ensured that her presence was documented but protected. No hunting was permitted in her territory. No tourists were guided to her locations. She remained wild and free, as nature intended. The Bennetts stayed in their home at the edge of the forest. Olivia grew into a remarkable child with an extraordinary gift for understanding animals. By age 7, she was accompanying local veterinarians on calls. By 10, she was working with wildlife rehabilitators, displaying an intuitive ability to calm injured creatures that experienced handlers found astonishing. On Olivia's 18th birthday, she received a special gift from Elena and Mason, a complete compilation of all the research, footage, and scientific papers that had resulted from her unique story. Among these materials was a final piece of evidence that Elena had kept private until that moment: DNA analysis confirming that the bear observed over the years was indeed the same animal that had saved Olivia as an infant. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Olivia walked alone to the forest edge. She carried no camera, no scientific equipment, just a small jar of honey that she placed on a flat stone at the tree line. "Thank you," she said softly to the watching forest, "for everything you taught us." Perhaps it was just the wind through the branches, or perhaps it was something more, but many witnesses over the years would report similar experiences in Blackwater Forest: a feeling of being watched by gentle, knowing eyes, a sense of protection rather than threat, a reminder that compassion sometimes transcends the boundaries we believe separate us from the wild. The mother bear of Blackwater Forest became a legend, not just a story told around campfires, but a documented case that changed how scientists understood animal consciousness. And whenever someone expressed disbelief at the idea of a wild predator protecting a human child, Olivia Bennett would simply smile and say, "Some bonds don't need explanation, they just are." In the years that followed, as Olivia became a renowned wildlife biologist herself, she would often return to that clearing. Sometimes she would bring students or colleagues, sharing the remarkable story that had shaped her life. But more often she came alone, sitting quietly in the place where two worlds had met and changed each other forever. And sometimes, if the light was just right and the forest particularly still, visitors to Blackwater would glimpse a remarkable sight. A woman sitting peacefully at the edge of a sun-dappled clearing, while a large grizzly bear watched from the shadows of the ancient trees. Two beings connected by an act of compassion that had defied every natural law but the most important one: that love, in its purest form, recognizes no boundaries.